So when I say biblical basis, by the way, I'm not talking just proof text, all right? But we should show that what we're talking about can be found in the sacred scriptures that we have. So before I show you the actual Bible verses, let me just kind of give you like two little lead-ins. And this is from the Catechism. That's what CCC means, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Human life is sacred because from its beginning, it involves the creative powers of God. All right? Human life is sacred because from the beginning, it involves the creative powers of God. So God was not, like the timekeep, how they say it, the old stopwatch analogy where God got everything started and then he backed off. He didn't just create man in the beginning through evolution and then, we are created through our parents. He's constantly and intimately connected to his creations. So I am not the origin of my children's souls. And I don't refer to them simply as a body. I refer to my children as persons, but I recognize the soul came from God. So I have to realize that when my children came into being, God was there, and it was a creative act of his that participated in that. All right? So that then means this second line should be so obvious, flowing from the first, but usually it's the obvious things that we miss. So let me just state that because from the beginning that we have been in a relationship with our Creator, it then follows that man remains in a special relationship with our Creator. So we remain in a relationship with God. He himself sustains us through his love. Remember I said before that if he were to withdraw his love from us, which he could not do because it's his nature, but if he were able to, we would wither and die almost like a plant that had no water or light. Okay? So we're in this relationship with God, and it's from the beginning. That's the point. Now, how do we know this from Scripture? Well, it says when Adam had relations with Eve, so we know this is sexual relations they're referring to. Eve then said, and she's quoted, so there must have been somebody there writing this down, right? I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Now, what's interesting about that is she doesn't say, me and Adam have had a child. She says, with the help of the Lord, I have produced a man. So there's an aspect of God who has been involved with this from the beginning, right? So I have Eve saying, let's call him Cain, he'll be a good boy. But if you know the story of Cain and Abel, he was not a good boy, all right? But nonetheless, so from the beginning we know this relationship was there between the Creator and the created. Now these two verses at least show us that in Psalms and in the prophet Jeremiah, we have Scripture referring to the unborn child as a you, as a person, right? Not calling it an it, or it could be, or will be, but I knew you in the womb. You formed my inmost being. You knit me in the womb, right? Now, if a person was so-called pro-choice or okay with abortions, right, this may not convince them. We have other arguments for that. But if you were a Christian and you were okay with abortions, you would have to reconcile this. If God formed the individual in the womb and spoke of it in terms of that, then what is it? Like even the atheist philosopher had said, if the term child means anything, then the term unborn child must too mean something, right? So anyway, and I told the last class that if you get a pregnant lady and hold a flashlight real close to their stomach, that's what you can see on the other side. I want to see if any of them will do it. You want to try that, Christian? Yeah. Get one of the ear spotlights though. You need a bright one. Another verse from St. Paul in 1 Corinthians. Your body's a temple. What does a temple hold? The Word of God. You're not your own. We don't like that. We want to be our own. We don't realize that this relationship that we're in continues. When we talk about the sacrament of marriage, and we will learn, at least I will tell you, that, like in my marriage, my wife's body and soul are not hers, they're mine. And mine are not mine, they're hers. We don't like that, but that's the reality of it, okay? All right, so to finish up this slide, does anybody know who Karawatia is? You've heard him by another name, John Paul II. That's Pope John Paul II, St. John Paul II. His baptized name was Karawatia. Now, Karawatia was a well-rounded philosopher, and he was into a philosophy that's known as personalism. Everything starts and ends with the human person. So we could at least ferret out two elements of his philosophy. It's from his book, Love and Responsibility. It's a thick book. It's an extraordinarily good book. But the two elements are this. One is that we have to have an obedience to the order of nature. All right? We have to have an obedience to the order of nature. So the way that the child comes into being, the way that the child is formed, the way the child is brought then into the world, there's an order to that. So we must have an obedience to the order of nature. The second is there has to be an emphasis on the value of the person. All right? The second thing is there has to be an emphasis on the value of the person. What this means is that it doesn't matter if we said who's more important, a quadriplegic who had such a low IQ that could barely speak, or Albert Einstein. Which one would we save if we had a choice? We have no way to make that choice. They're incommensurable. We don't look utilitarian at what contributions they can make. We don't use situational ethics saying, well, what would be the most loving thing? This person, would sense the pain in a different way. It's incommensurable, all right? So, any questions on this slide? Anything you need me to repeat before we move on? Yes?
Where's Carol?
Karawatia. Yeah. That's John Paul II. That's Pope John Paul II. Saint John Paul II. If you ever wonder why the J in my name is like, the U's like an O and the J's like a Y. Woj. That's how they pronounce J's in Polish. All right, Watia. All right, I think this is the more interesting slide. I bet it's going to be new for most of you. Now, the reason why I don't use a textbook is because the textbook doesn't make the argument in a way, or the presentation in a way that I think is convincing to you. It gives you information, and it would properly catechize you. But I'm not just interested in catechizing you. I'm interested in showing you how one arrives at that decision. And then I want you to think for yourselves. So here's the idea. Over the course of the years teaching, I have heard arguments. And I try now to arrange my teaching in a way that they address the arguments that those students have asked. So every year I tweak it. You guys will teach me something, and next year I will tweak it, saying I could probably do a better job if I do it this way. This particular argument, I even had a sibling who said to me once, the Catholic Church has changed position on abortion. And you know it, pointing to me. You know it, because I know you know the history of this. You just don't want to tell anybody, because then everybody's going to think the Catholic Church can change anything. Okay, so what I want to show you is how that individual, there was something right in what he said, right? But there's also something in great error in what he said. So I'm going to try to explain the distinctions between those. First of all, have anybody ever heard a term of being pregnant, quickening? Have you ever heard that? Okay. Quickening is when, now, it's what they thought, is when the soul enters the body of the child, okay? When the soul enters the body of the child. So if you have, maybe your mother might have been young enough for you to remember, or an older sister, or an aunt, or such, where they felt movement, right? As soon as they felt movement within the womb, that was known as quickening. So it was thought then, well, that must be when the soul entered the body. Let's not forget that they didn't have modern science, okay? So they were using as much reason and sense as they could with what they can observe, and they really didn't have a lot of observation. So it was thought also, there's another aspect of this that you need to know as a foundation. It was thought that the man carried all of the potential for life in him. So the word semen actually is just a Latin word that means seed, all right? So it was thought that the woman was the nurturing fertile ground. And the man carried the power of life within him, and the seed would be planted into the womb, the nurturing womb of the woman. And there it would grow. Now, we might find that, almost a little silly, but let's just be, honest, that had we not known things about how they worked, that's how plants grow. I mean, it's not that off, right? You put a seed into nurturing soil, and then at some point you see a plant. When you see a plant, then you know you have a plant. Okay, so how they would thought it was that the man's seed contained all the aspects of life. It was placed into the fertile soil, the nurturing womb of the woman, and at quickening, that's when the human person came into being. All right? That was their understanding. So we even have the word anima. No stick drawing?
No stick drawing.
The word anima is the Latin word that literally means soul. All right? But does anybody have, what does anima sound like? What word do we have that sounds like anima? What? No, that's entirely different, to be honest. Yeah. Animal or animate. Okay? Both are right. So anima, it was thought when this is animates. Now, what is an animation? If you guys did drawings, right? And like we used to do like drawings at the bottom of our notebooks, and if you flip through them real quick, it looks like the still drawings are animated. They come to life. So this is where the word came from. This is why they thought the soul was given the name of what comes to life within the child. It is right, as Angel said, it's also where we get the word animal from. So if somebody says to you, dogs don't have souls, you tell them, oh yes they do. It's even where the word comes from, animal, right? They have different souls than we do, but they nonetheless have souls because they're animated, right? Okay, so these are the things you need to know. Now, here's what the Catholic Church has always taught. This has never wavered. You will not find anything that, how do I want to say, that is divergent from this. The Catholic Church has always held that the killing of an unborn person, and remember, a person is an embodied being. Words are so important, right? So when we use the word person, we are referring to an embodied being, body and soul. The Catholic Church has always taught that the intentional killing of an unborn person is a sin. Now, that was thought to happen at quickening. We now know that it's not quickening, but it's fertilization is when life begins. So my sibling was right in one sense. The Catholic Church changed its position, but its position wasn't changed as to what is or is not an abortion and killing. Its position was modern science has revealed now when life begins. If somebody, and I've heard somebody say to me, then why, if that's so important, did the Catholic Church not know about it earlier? Because God does not divinely reveal natural sciences to the Catholic Church, all right? I mean, that's something that's done here in natural science, not in theology. You may or may not know this. The discovery for how fertilization works did not even come about until 1876. That's 150 years ago. Before that, now let's not, okay, this wasn't the moment when they had the idea. They had the idea earlier that there's something else going on here. The man does not hold all the power of life. There's something else going on here. This man was working with sea urchins, and he could see under a microscope when the egg walls, the membranes of the walls were penetrated. So they can he verified this is when it happened. So this changed everything. So the Catholic Church's position is that the killing of an unborn person, body and soul, is a sin. That's always been consistent. All they now know is it happens a lot earlier than we thought. All right? So did the Catholic Church change the position on abortion? No. Biology has informed us better when life begins. All right? Discoveries take time to come to fruition. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever gone up to Sunbury, the Joseph Priestley house. Anybody know what Joseph Priestley is? He discovered oxygen. Apparently we had oxygen before he discovered it, all right? I mean, but he was the first person that could say, this is what oxygen is, all right? So, okay, so language. If you want to change somebody's perception of truth, change the language. You know, language, you know, all words are signifiers, right? We already did this, right? Remember we did the types of signs, conventional signs, natural signs. So we're struggling now with human sexuality. We're changing languages between what is or is not marriage, what is or is not male or female. All right, so if you want to control something, you need to control the language. So in terms of life issues, this is the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. What they did was they changed the language from fertilization to pregnancy. And I'll explain why this is so important. And you may not know this. Maybe some of you do. Okay, every act of intercourse does not result in pregnancy. We know that. Ovulation must occur, and then the egg must be fertilized. Fertilization describes the process when a single sperm gradually penetrates the layers of an egg to form a new cell zygote. Okay, so that's the moment, what we'd say, of conception or fertilization. It usually occurs in a fallopian tube, takes up to 24 hours. There's only a short window during which an egg can be fertilized. Yeah, it's like 1 to 2 days. A woman's fertility window is about 7 to 9 days. Outside of that, girls, it's physically impossible, biologically impossible for you to get pregnant. If there's no egg present and no semen present, it's impossible, right? Or if the semen is present and there's no egg. So anyway, if fertilization does not occur, then the egg dissolves, and then hormonal changes triggers menstruation, and then all comes out in menses. If it does occur, the zygote divides, differentiates into, now here's a new word. So has anybody read George Orwell when they talk about newspeak, right? Preembryo. Preembryo is not a term. I mean, they introduced it. Let me explain to you, and by the way, if I did say fact check, all right? Why do they use the word preembryo? If you guys want to do any of the biomedical issues, we'll look at in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization, like Octomom, everybody remembers or heard of Octomom, maybe they had 8 kids, right? Okay, if you were having fertility issues and went to an IVF clinic, they don't just fertilize one egg and have one embryo and implant one embryo. They fertilize multiple and they implant multiple. They may selectively reduce them. It's a nice way to say that they'll abort 2, okay? They also pre-select them according to certain, what they would call better criteria. You know, we say that you don't apply that kind of criteria to a person. But then they also are going to have ones they reserve back. So they have embryos that are not implanted. What do they do with those? They cryogenically freeze them. So what is their outcome? It's hard to say. Sometimes they're held there indefinitely. Sometimes they're used in embryonic stem cell research. So if a woman has the idea that my unborn children are going to be used in some sort of test, it didn't sit well with the consciousness of some people, so they've invented the word, and they have invented it, pre-embryo. Don't worry, we're not destroying embryos or human life. These are pre-embryos. It doesn't have any significance scientifically. All right, so let's not pretend that, you know, some fields are not, how do you want to say, not susceptible to politics and money, okay? Anyway, they say the preembryo carried down the fallopian tube towards the uterus. Implantation of the preembryo into the uterine lining begins about 5 days after fertilization. Let's just say it takes usually about 14 days. So 1/3 to 1/2 of all fertilized eggs never fully implant. We know that. So those are spontaneous abortions that, you know, you have obviously culpability for. Then the last line is the telling one. A pregnancy is considered to be established only after implantation is complete. Now, why would they say that? They would say that because if you were on contraception 10 years ago, it had to legally say on it, may be an abortifacient. People had issues with that. I don't want to have abortion, so what do I do? So if we could change the language from fertilization to establish pregnancy, then contraception doesn't technically disrupt an established pregnancy. So therefore, it's not an abortifacient. It's just a trick of language, and you should know that, all right? Nothing's changed. It's still an embryo, and you can still act as an abortifacient. Calling something a pre-embryo doesn't change anything, all right? We don't have pre-humans. It's a human life. And we already said a human life is a person. So what they've done in a phrase there is they've taken the scientific understanding that life begins at fertilization, and they have placed it into the new terms of pregnancy begins at implantation. And this is all done in the last, couple decades. All right, so let me show you some other stuff. Yes?
What about I went over this, but does that mean like the church is against like the prenatal and stuff?
Yes, absolutely. Unless it's in the case of a rape where it stops ovulation. And it's because they would understand it then, if a woman was raped and there's no ovulation, they would administer at the Catholic hospital Plan B because they would see that sperm, I know it may sound odd, as an extension of the attack. So they are repelling the attack from happening, all right? But absolutely, they'd be against Plan B for any other reason, all right? Because it's just a contraception. We'll get into that another day. Okay, so here's from the Alan Guttmacher Institute, so you can understand, they're pretty honest about it. The question of when life begins is an eternal one, debated by philosophers and theologians for centuries. Okay, well, technically that's true. It was debated for centuries. And likely to be destined to forever elude consensus. Really? I mean, we hear a lot, right, maybe rightfully so, with climate change. We call them, science deniers. Well, this is a pretty big science denial. I mean, nobody talks about this, though, right? On the separate but closely related question of when a woman is considered pregnant, you notice we're not talking about when she conceives. We're talking about when she's pregnant. The medical community has long been clear. Pregnancy is established when a fertilized egg has been implanted in the wall of the woman's uterus. This definition is critical to distinguish between a contraceptive that prevents pregnancy and an abortifacient that terminates it. At least they're just telling you this is why we're talking like this. And on that point, federal policy has long been both consistent and in accord with the scientists. Drugs and devices that act before implantation prevent rather than terminate a pregnancy. All you have to do is say, if I had this individual that wrote this here, can I take this word out and put in conception, and then would your paragraph be scientifically accurate? They have to say no. Okay, so then all you do is flip out pregnancy and replace pregnancy for for fertilization. All right. I could have put up 30 of these. So here's from Princeton University. This guy, where you read a textbook, Human Embryology and Teratology, 2nd edition. He even says this textbook lists pre-embryo among the discarded and replaced terms in modern embryology, describing it as an ill-defined and inaccurate. So they know it's a politically motivated term, right? Although life is a continuous process, because you will hear that, it's true, right? I mean, I've heard people say to me, life is a process. It starts with the parents, comes through to the child, up to 50, maybe 70% of embryos never implant. So there's a destructive force from the beginning. But life comes from this destruction. Okay, you can talk in those terms, that's fine. But the reality is that, let's not pretend, as he says, this is a critical landmark. Under ordinary circumstances, this is new, genetically distinct human organisms that are formed. We now have 2 haploid cells coming forward, right? We have now 46 chromosomes. This is a zygote. Thus, the diploid number is restored and the embryonic genome is formed. This embryo now exists as a genetic unity. This is new life. What kind of life? A human life. Is it a person? There are persons that aren't human. There are humans that aren't persons. Do you see how the argument works? So, it is true. It is true that up to 40%, and I've heard people make claims up to 70% of embryos do not implant. As a matter of fact, science is telling us that the woman's body has a way to detect if there might be an irregularity or a deformity or something genetically that's not correct with the zygote, that the body then will actually excrete hormones that makes that come out in menses. This is you're not morally culpable for this. Remember, the ordering of man's human acts must be rational, free, deliberate, and conscious. You're not conscious for that. Boy, we just have a minute. This is just the final claim. In the end, if you want the whole argument in a nutshell, in the end, the beginning of human life begins at conception. And we can't envision a human being who is not a person. Sorry for the ending so quick. See you guys.